Hello everyone, munclesonkey here, and I have a guide about RS3 weapons and armor statistics, how they work, and basically what you should be doing to make sure that your damage and your overall combat experience is the best that it should be. So whether you are a brand new player to RS, have no idea what's going on, whether you're a returning player who's just trying to get back into the game and hasn't had much experience, or even if you are an experienced player and just doesn't have the best grasp on exactly what all these weapons and armor statistics mean, and the best way that they can affect you in combat and make you deal the most damage and all that. This video is going to be trying to explain some of the basics of that. So first of all, what I want to go over with is offense versus defense. This applies to all combat styles, not just melee or not just magic, but damage output is nearly always your priority. There's only a very certain few situations where you shouldn't be focusing on damage output, and if you're just a player who's going to be doing Slayer, killing monsters for fun, and maybe some lower level boss, and you're not going to have to worry about this yet, so you should always focus on just doing as much damage as possible. The best ways to increase your damage are never using shields, so you always want to make sure you're using dual wield weapons or a 2H sword or bow or something like that. Also using power armor such as the God Wars armor or Nex armors will boost your damage as well. The Nex armors are fairly expensive, but the God Wars armors aren't too much, and people should be, for the most part, be able to get their hands on those fairly early. And you also want to make sure that you're using the best weapons that your stats will allow. So for example, if you have 75 attack, you should be using a God Sword and not dragon weapons. This sounds pretty simple, but a lot of people struggle with this, so it's important to always keep that in mind. Continuing off of what we were talking about with offense versus defense, we're going to be going into weapon tiers now. So weapons increase in damage and accuracy exponentially, so the higher level you are in your stats, the better weapons you can equip, and it's always very important to upgrade your weapons as soon as possible. So I decided to show some range weapons here as an example, although this does remain constant in magic and melee weapons as well. All magic, melee weapon, and ranged weapon and melee weapon tiers, they all go up, so they all have like level 50 weapons, level 60, level 70, level 75, level 80, and then continuing on to level 90. There's no level 85 weapons yet except for range, but at level 50 range, this is just the example that I have on screen. We have the rune crossbows at level 60, the red salamanders. There's also some other range weapons that you can use, such as the dragon crossbows or the demon slayer crossbows. Obviously the red salamander is the cheapest and the easiest to obtain, and then level 70 it goes up to the black salamander, level 75 it goes up to the hand cannon, and if you were to continue on this trend, at level 80 you would go up to either the chaotic crossbows or the royal crossbow or the Zerite bow, and then at level 85 there is the darts from player unports, and at level 90 of course is the ascension crossbows. So often as weapons go up in tier, they also increase in price, so they can be more expensive. For example, with melee, some of those god swords can be a lot more expensive than your old whip or dragon weapons. However, it's very important to upgrade as soon as possible, and the reason for this is the more damage you're doing, the faster you will kill enemies, the more faster you get experience, and the faster you'll be able to make money because you'll be able to kill enemies and pick up their drops faster. So now that you have your weapons all sorted out, the next thing to worry about is ability setups. Of course, there are so many different abilities in the game that are useful in so many different situations. It would be impossible to go over all of them and give you a whole ton of different ability bars, but I did include some really basic ones that are going to be very, very nice just for starting out. So first of all, with magic, which is the best combat style in terms of damage and accuracy, at the top you're going to have your 4 basics, which I would recommend Rack, Sonic Blast, or if you have the dual wield magic instead of the staff, so you'll be using Concentrated Blast, then Chain, and then Impact. And then you have your threshold abilities in Asphyxiate and Wild Magic, and you want to be using the threshold abilities as much as possible. These are extremely good abilities in terms of damage, and they will really help you wreck creatures. So you want to make sure as soon as you have enough for a threshold and the ability is cooled down, then you want to make sure you pop that. And then also Metamorphosis. Of course, there is also the Sunshine ultimate ability, which is the best one, but you don't unlock that until completing the quest to World Wakes. And then again, with range and melee, I just created some basic action bars for you to copy down if you're struggling, or if you don't really know what you should be putting on your ability bar and you're confused. Again, these are just very basic ability bars. They're not going to last forever. They're not going to be the best in all situations, but if you're just a low level and you want a good starting point to build off of, this is a good place to start. Now that you have your weapons and ability bars sorted, the next thing to worry about is the actual weaknesses, what style of weapons and armor you should be using against certain monsters. So almost every single monster in the game does have a weakness. Not all of them do. There are some boss monsters and some even regular monsters which are marked with having no weakness, but for the most part, every single monster in the game is going to be weak against a certain style. In the picture, for example, there's a living rock striker which is weak to crush weapons or melee, but using crush weapons will have an additional additional accuracy bonus against it. So first of all, there is a little table here that I included, which is going to say exactly how accurate your weapons are going to be against certain styles. So for example, if you're fighting a magical monster, which in most cases is going to be weak to range, and you're using the wrong combat style against it, because the combat triangle is magic is strong against melee, melee is strong against range, range is strong against magic. We've all heard this, but this holds true to monsters as well. So if you're fighting a magic monster and using the wrong combat style against it, so if the monster is weak to range and you're using melee against it, you're going to have a 20% accuracy penalty, which means that if your weapons normally had 1000 accuracy, that's just an example given, they would only do 200 accuracy points, which after that it's determined on how high the monster's defense level is on whether you'll hit it or not, but that's a little bit complicated to go into. But basically your weapons are only going to have 20% accuracy if you're using the wrong combat style. If a monster is a magic creature and you're using magic against it, so if it's weak to range and you're using magic, you will have 50% accuracy. So going back to our 1000 accuracy example, it'll be decreased to 500. If you're using the correct weakness but the wrong style, for example, if the monster is weak to range but it's specifically weak to bolts and you're using arrows against it, you will have a 75% accuracy. So again, with our example, you'd have 750 out of that 1000 accuracy. And then if you are using the correct weakness, again, if the monster is weak to bolts and you're using bolts against it, you will have 90% of the accuracy, which is only really important if you're fighting high-level monsters or if you're using low-level weapons. For the most part, if you're fighting monsters that are around your level or lower, or if you are using higher level weapons such as chaotic weapons, as long as you're using the correct style, for example, melee against a monster that's weak to melee, you should be able to hit just fine. Of course, along with weapons, every good warrior or slayer needs some armor to go along with that as well. So there are three major types of armor in the game. One of them is kind of split into two groups. So first of all, you have the power armor, which is the armor that boosts damage. For example, the God Warrior's Dungeon armors, the Nex armors, and the level 90 degradable armors are some examples of these. The most common one that you'll find is, for example, the Bandos armor, the Armadillo armor, and the Subjugation robes from Zamorak. And these armors are going to boost your damage based on what level they are. So for example, level 70 armor is going to boost your damage 10% of level 70 weapons, and then level 80 armor is going to boost your damage 10% of what level 80 weapons would do, and such and such. So level 90 armor would boost your damage 10% of what level 90 weapons would do, and this just decreases as you go into higher level weapons. It's a little bit complicated, but basically if you're using level 90 weapons with level 70 power armor, it's about a 6.5% damage increase, which is pretty significant if you think about it. The second form of armor is tank armor, which is the armor that increases your defense more than the power armor does, but it doesn't give you a damage bonus. So this can be useful in some situations. A good example of this armor would be Barrow's armor from Barrows. However, most styles of armor in the game are going to be tank armor, is by far the most common, and this is useful if you don't quite have enough money for the power armor, because tank armor is typically much cheaper, or if you're in a situation where you're taking a lot of damage and you need a bit more defense. And the final one is hybrid armor, and this is the most complex style. It's also known as all armor, all, and hybrid. Two different styles. They work slightly differently, but for the most part, the only thing you need to know about them is they give lower defense, much lower than the power armor or the tank armor, but they give the exact same amount of defensive stats to all three styles, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But another thing about them is they do not decrease your accuracy. For example, if you're wearing hybrid armor and you want to range, but then you want to switch into melee, you will not get an accuracy penalty for doing this in hybrid armor, whereas you would with the tank armor or the power armor. So you might be looking at some of your armor and wondering, well, I have this defensive stat on the armor. It says it does 298 defense, but what exactly does that mean? So there is some calculations involved. The higher your defense is, obviously, the more difficult it's going to be for monsters to hit you, but you will not get that full amount of defense towards every monster's attack unless you are wearing hybrid armor, which obviously has lower defense. But we're just going to take this Bandos chestplate, for example, which says that it has 298 armor bonus on it. What that means is that it gives 298 bonus towards range, but only 187 armor against melee, and then only 98 armor against magic, because how armor works is it gives 100% of that armor bonus that it shows towards the combat style that is strong against. So melee armor gives this towards range, magic armor gives this towards melee, and range armor gives this towards magic. And then it gives 63% of that armor rating towards the style that is the same as, so melee to melee, magic to magic, range to range, and then only 31% of the armor rating rating that it is weak against. So melee is weak to magic, obviously, range is weak to melee, and magic is weak to range, and so on and so forth. So the final thing about armor that is very important to keep in mind is the weapon accuracy, and you will get an accuracy penalty for using the wrong style with armor. So your chest plate, plate legs, and shield are the only armor that affects your accuracy. You can wear all the rest. You can wear helms, gloves, shields, not shields, but capes, boots. You can wear all of that, and it does not matter what style it is. Obviously, the defensive bonuses will change based on what style the armor is, but it will not affect your accuracy. However, wearing a chest plate will give you minus 5% accuracy if it's the wrong type. Same goes with plate legs, same goes with shields, although in most situations you should not be wearing shields. So for example, if you're wearing range armor while meleeing, you'll get penalized 10% if you're wearing, for example, a royal d'hide top and royal d'hide legs, but you're using a melee weapon. And then if you're using magic armor while meleeing or ranging, same goes, minus 10% accuracy. So it's always very important to make sure you're wearing the right type. So that about sums up my video when it comes to armor and weapons and how they work. Again, a lot of this might be really confusing if this is your first time hearing some of this information. So what I did include is in the description there's going to be some links to some reading material on the RS Wiki. I know we all love reading, but it does have a lot of helpful info there, and that's where I learned a lot about armor myself. So it does explain a lot more than I can in just a 10-minute video, so if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. Also, you can leave any questions in the description of the video, or under the comments section at least, and either me or someone else reading the video that might have a little bit of knowledge about this as well will probably end up replying to you. So that's about all. Thank you guys for watching, and farewell.